7, 6. Is it recording? I guess it's recording. Thank you for coming to my talk. So the randomly chosen title is, did you say taxonomy or content type? And I want to note that this is version 1.0.0 beta 1 of this presentation, so thank you for being my beta testers. This is actually something I talked about briefly at a lightning talk at a Drupal, Boston Drupal meetup several months ago. There was some interest in it, and I was also invited to the Talking Drupal podcast to talk about it. And you know, the question is, does it really make a difference, especially in Drupal 8, whether you use taxonomy or references to nodes on your site? And I'll say what I mean a little more in a sec. So who am I? I'm Benji Fisher. I work at Isavera as a senior developer. I'm a Vim guru now that I've been working professionally in Drupal for 5 or 6 years. It's becoming less true that I'm more of a Vim expert than a Drupal expert. And depending on who's in the room, I will sometimes call myself a Drupal expert. I also like to bicycle, yoga, square dance, play bridge. I have a few projects. The first two things that I did shortly after I started working in Drupal were hijack the vimrc project for configuring the Vim text editor for working with Drupal. My first module, more than 100 sites are reported using it, yay. And paragraphs table of contents is a little something I put together in the last year. And about a year ago, I started maintaining the documentation page on installing Drupal 8. And then I made them change it so that on the release page where it says learn how to install Drupal, now it goes there instead of the page for installing Drupal 7. Okay. In my past life, I was a math whiz, a professional mathematician, and a teacher. This slide does not belong at the end where it often ends up, so please interrupt me. Nothing I've prepared is so canonical or clever that it's worth putting off your questions for. So let's build a site, and this is different from the description I wrote for NetCamp. But let's say I want to make a site for some of my favorite poems so I can share them with the world. Each poem has an author, and I want to either tag or attach the author to the poem. So there are a couple of ways I could do this. I could use taxonomy. I could create an author vocabulary, and each of my poets would be a term in that vocabulary, and then each of my poems would be tagged by one of those taxonomy terms. And if I'm just attaching a name to a poem, that's probably the way I would do it 99% of the time. But maybe I don't just want to attach a name to a poem. I want to have the author's picture somewhere on the site, or maybe a short biography. And that's beginning to sound less like a taxonomy or a vocabulary and sound more like a new content type. So another way I could do it is I could make a person content type, and instead of title and body, I can call it name and biography for the standard fields that Drupal gives me out of the box. And then instead of tagging with taxonomy terms, I could add references, node references, content type references to the person nodes that I've created. And I created a little demo site to show this if you want to follow along from your seats, if the Wi-Fi will be kind to you. You can go to dev-term or node with hyphens .pantheonsite.io. So thanks Pantheon for giving us developers free demo sites. And thanks to Lando for making it easy to copy that site down to local and push the database in whichever direction I'm working in on my little demo site. So right, I don't need to go there. I can show you the beautiful home page in classic Bartik blue of my poetry site. So I have over here in the sidebar a link to each of the poems. Let's see, I did that with a view, right? And I just have the default homepage River of News. So the short version, which seems to include the full text of each poem, is displayed, and just the name of the author. And I've displayed it two different ways. First as an author term, taxonomy term, and second as a person node. Normally you would hide those labels, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we want to see what we're doing. And looking at these teasers of the poems, you see there's no visible difference between the taxonomy and the node reference. So what difference does it make? Especially in Drupal 8, this was on the way to being true, but less true in Drupal 7, and much less true in Drupal 6. But in Drupal 8, nodes and taxonomy terms are both entities. They're based on the entity system in Drupal. And I should stop myself. Raise your hand if you're reasonably familiar with building Drupal sites. Okay, so there are a couple of people in the audience who are less familiar. So I apologize to you if I've glossed over some things. I think most of the people in the room are with me. You can add a content type, person content type, or you can add vocabulary. I'm calling the author vocabulary, and and if you ever want to play a prank on a friend and tell them to look up my presentation, which will be posted somewhere, I've got screenshots in there, but I also have them open in tabs in my browser. So you can add the content type, add the vocabulary. You can add fields to either one. It's a very similar process. You can configure the edit form. Again, and view modes, that looks very similar. And finally, you can add your person nodes and your author taxonomy terms. So here's the page for configuring the person content type. Oh, the screens don't perfectly match. Maybe full screen mode isn't what we want. How does that look? No, the difference now is that I can shove it over a little to the right. So I see the whole thing on my screen, but okay. So here I'm editing content type. I've called it person content type. A content type where each node is a person. What a lovely description. Instead of title, I'm calling it name. I don't put it in any menus. I don't display the author information. And by default, it's published. Compare that to creating a taxonomy or a vocabulary. This is the wrong screen. What I want is the edit screen. No, I'm sorry. I'm just in the wrong tab. Here we go. This is what I want to look at. This is a little similar. Again, we have the tabs going across the top. Edit, manage fields, manage form display, manage view display, just as we had for the content type. Instead of name, I'm calling it author. And the description with great originality, I said vocabulary where each term is an author. So those are the pages for creating or later editing the content type and the vocabulary. let's see, this was configuring fields on the content type, I think. Yes, on the person content type. So in addition to the default title and we have the body, which I've relabeled biography, and then I've added an image field, which I've labeled mugshot. And then I think that looks almost identical when I manage fields for the vocabulary. Notice any differences? Who wants to play Waldo? This is a little different. Well, of course, instead of content person, it says taxonomy author in the breadcrumbs, so that's a difference. Any other differences you notice? They're pretty minor.
Oh, we know list tab on the content type?
That's right. That's one. So you don't list the nodes of a content type from the same page where you edit or configure the content type. And I guess you do have an edit tab, don't you? Yeah, edit, manage fields, form display, and manage display. Yeah, the other four are the same. The field types are the same. I have an image field for the mugshot. I have long text with summary for the biography. The only other difference I noticed is that on the taxonomy, I have a field I added, so it has the name field biography, and it was just body. I did not change the name, the machine name, when I relabeled it biography for the content type. So very minor differences. I disable all the published, authored on stuff, the URL alias for the person content type, and the field will just have entries for name, mugshot, and biography, and pretty much the same as this. The taxonomy term or the vocabulary is pretty much the same, except there aren't as many fields that I've disabled. So that maybe is worth looking at a little bit. What have I disabled? Description and URL alias. So URL alias is disabled. So there's this description field, which is a short text field, I think, by default on a new vocabulary. And there's a body field, which is long formatted text by default on a content type. And one of them I reused, and the other one is sort of left over. So again, minor differences. But then there's whether or not a node is published. You don't have that flag for a taxonomy term. When it was authored and by whom it was authored. That's information that doesn't come on a taxonomy term. Whether it's promoted to the front page, whether it's sticky at the top of lists. So a couple of more flags that come standard out of the box for content type. If we wanted to use those, then we might think that would push us towards content type rather than vocabulary. If we've already decided or have other reasons for deciding to use vocabulary, we could add the extra fields. Not a big deal. Not a big difference. Here I am creating a person field, or person node rather, for the poet William Blake. One of my favorite poets. I'm pretty sure he was mad. And I have to apologize. After I started building this site, I slapped myself around and said, why did you choose 3 dead white guys? Now, there's a good reason for the dead part. You know why?
People aren't popular till they're dead.
People aren't popular till they're dead?
Well, in artistic poetry and art.
That's right. Our artists and certainly poets are
More popular.
Are usually obscure until they're dead. But there's a sort of legalistic reason.
Copyright.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about copyright. And any poems that I grab from William Blake are in the public domain. I don't have to worry that I've published them on the Pantheon platform. No one's going to come sue me. So there's a good reason for dead. Well, they're all English, right? Shakespeare, Blake, and Donne. Yeah, they're all English. So there's certainly a bias towards white guys and the particular subset of white guys who come from England or America, because the poems I know best are in English. Probably could have tried harder to come up with a female poet. Emily Dickinson, would her work be in the public domain? Maya Angelou? No, she's still alive?
Emily Dickinson is a good choice for you.
Yeah.
In future presentations, I think.
Okay,
Is
so for copyright reasons, I won't take Maya Angelou, I won't take Toni Morrison, but I could add a few poems by Emily Dickinson.
She died in 2014, and she's black, so that would, count.
Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could add some diversity.
But just because she's dead doesn't mean her work is in the public domain.
When do you?
Yeah, that can last a long time.
Oh, really?
And if they renew, it can last for longer than that. Copyright's a lot stickier than just they're dead or it's 100 years ago nowadays.
I mean, the approximate rule for determining what the current law on copyright is that it's extendable until at least 10 years more than since the invention of Mickey Mouse till today.
Yeah, right.
Emily Dickinson died in 1886. She's a
So
solid
she's-
choice.
she's-
Okay, thank you.
She's going strong right up until then.
Since I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. That's Emily Dickinson,
There are
isn't it?
some Maya Angelou in public domain.
We could certainly, you could create a page, we'll all vote on it after this.
Yeah, that would be great.
The heart asks pleasure first. That's Emily Dickinson too, right? Isn't it? I think that's short enough that I know the whole thing. Right, so here I am creating a page for William Blake. And here I am creating a taxonomy term for William Blake. And the images, of course, are from Wikimedia Commons. And I put the attribution text into the alt field, which isn't ideal, but at least it's there. And finally, when you create a content type poem, and you have the title of the poem and the body. Prudence is a rich, ugly old maid courted by incapacity. It's one of Blake's Proverbs of Hell. You have a choice when you set up the content type of how you're going to enter the taxonomy term or the node reference. One option for both is a drop-down list. And since I only have 3 poets on my site, that's a reasonable user interface. Oops, I changed one of those. William Blake, not William Shakespeare. And yeah, so these two guys, these two options look very similar. And then when I view that page, this is of Blake's Proverbs of Hell. This is my mother's favorite. I, of course, deliberately chose very short poems so that they wouldn't distract too much from the structure of the site. You have the body of the poem, one line, and then the taxonomy term. I'm sorry, the person note, and then the author term. And in one of them, the link is in blue, and in one of them it's black. That's sort of the only visible difference between the two, right? Initially, I had them in the other order. I had taxonomy term first, and then person note. It turns out that there's a clearfix class attached here, so that this comes out completely below it. When I had them in the other order, the picture was floated left, and then the person node would come fit in here below and to the right, which looked horrible. So, again, minor differences. Yeah, so you can do all of these things, and because Drupal 8 fairly consistently relies on this underlying entity system, all those things you do to it, adding the field, configuring the content type, they all work pretty much the same. And if you look at the database, it's pretty much the same. So what difference does it make? Does it make any difference? I guess I more or less went through that slide too. So think about what Drupal give for free. Right, I should fix that. What does Drupal give you for free when you've got a node? It gives you revisions for free. That, I think, is an important difference. It gives you created and changed timestamps. It gives you author information. And it gives you bulk operations out of the box. So as you, let's say, we go here and we go to admin content. So the bulk operations, I could check off some of my poems, and then simultaneously I could delete those 3 or make them sticky or unsticky, promote them or remove them from the front page, publish or unpublish. So that's what I mean by bulk operations. Yeah?
Sorry, do you get different display modes with the taxonomy like you do Node?
Yes.
Full content, teaser, and
So let's see, that's
I
Node.
haven't played around with taxonomies too much, but
This is Node. Okay, here's the vocabulary. Manage the display. There's the default and the taxonomy term page, which is sort of the opposite, right? For a content type, you think of the default as being the full display, and then you have the teaser, which is small. Taxonomy is sort of backwards. The default is the small piece that you're going to put all over the place, and the taxonomy term page is where you might display the whole thing. And certainly in Drupal 8, it's easy to add additional display modes. So either form mode or view mode. I just go to this configuration page, and I could add a new view mode for taxonomy terms if I needed a new one. So that is probably a different answer in Drupal 7. But in Drupal 8, yes, you get view modes just the same. So bulk operations, I was just explaining, that's something you get for nodes, but not for taxonomy terms. Taxonomy, it gives you hierarchy. Yes, it says give.
No, the screen went out. It came back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks fine to me.
Honestly, it was bad a minute ago.
It gives you hierarchy. So, you know, if I had a more expansive poetry site, I could have American poets, and they'd all live in one section of the taxonomy tree, and then European poets and South African poets, or however else I wanted to classify them. It gives you drag and drop ordering. Which, when you need it, is a very useful feature. So if I go to structure, taxonomy, author, list terms, most people hide the row weights. I could drag and drop, change the order of the terms in my taxonomy, and then why don't I go to content types, poem, do I want manage fields? Yeah, manage fields. And then when I attach the author term, default value, reference type. Oh, what do I? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking in the wrong place. When I manage the form display for the author term, instead of a, oh, where is it? No, I'm wrong. I'm looking in the wrong place. It's here, isn't it? I can't find out. Edit vocabulary list. I'm confused. There's some place where you choose. Let me try once more. Does it manage the field? Author term. So where do you say how you want it to appear? That's default value. That's not what I want.
In the drop-down?
Which drop-down?
No, in the drop-down, you said how it appears where?
Yeah, when I'm attaching it to a poem.
Yeah, I think that's it. So I think the default will follow your dragging of the terms.
Isn't it just when you create one?
I don't think so.
You mean the order in the drop-down when you're adding it to a node, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that default is what, when you were dragging the terms.
Okay, so you're saying that if I were to
Yeah.
put John Donne at the bottom,
Yeah.
and reload the page, then you're right. John Donne comes at the bottom. So, so drag and drop ordering is something that I get out of the box for taxonomy terms, and that'll affect the order they come in when I'm adding them to a poem node. And out of the box with taxonomy, you get a list of associated content. So if I click on the author term for William Blake, I get the larger image. Well, I configured that to use the large image style. I get the biography, which was hidden in the default node but is visible on the term page. And then I get teaser versions of all the nodes tagged with William Blake. Tiger is one of my favorite, know it by heart. And Proverbs of Hell is a very interesting collection. I look it up sometime when you need a good source of one-liners. A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees. So anyway, these are some of the things you get out of the box with taxonomy. And then in the next slide, I list those 4 things you get for free with nodes, the 3 things that you get for taxonomy, and how hard is it to change them later. So if you decide you need revisions, and you've decided to go with a taxonomy, a vocabulary, well, you know what that stands for? Think Drupal. Common Drupal slogan. There's a module for that. So adding revisions to taxonomy terms is sort of a big job, but there's a module for that. I haven't tried it out. Your mileage may vary. Created and changed timestamps. Well, it's easy to add a time or date field to the taxonomy, and then it's a little more work to make it auto-update. Think you need some code to do that. Author information. You could attach a user reference to the vocabulary, so that would be pretty easy to add. Bulk operations. I think that's pretty easy. I haven't actually tested it, but you can certainly make a view that lists taxonomy terms, and then I think you can add bulk operations to that view. I think. And back when I was first learning to code in Drupal, I was learning from Pro Drupal development, now updated for Drupal 6. And it started off with making an action as your first exercise in Drupal coding. And I think that is still a good place to start. It's sort of a discrete piece of coding, and there are a lot of ways you can use an action. One of them is with use bulk operations, which has now mostly been put into Drupal core. Hierarchy, if you want that on nodes, I think that's kind of hard. I did a quick look and didn't see any modules, like maybe there's something for Drupal 7. So if you want a hierarchical arrangement of your author, person, things, entities, then that's a strong argument for using taxonomy rather than the content type. Drag and drop ordering. It's easy to add a weight field to the node, but then getting the drag and drop interface, you'd have to figure out, oh, I'm sure there's some JavaScript library that's being added to the page. Should be doable to replicate that experience for nodes. The list of associated content is probably the easiest thing to replicate because you can just build views. One thing you should consider is the admin experience. If you have a site that has a bunch of different content types, and your editors are editing poems, and they're editing events, and they're editing what else you put on a Drupal site, recipes, and this and that and the other thing, and they're used to going to administration content and seeing the list of things and looking for the node type they want. And if they're familiar to going to the add content page, node add, and choosing the content type they want to add, and you've decided to go with the author vocabulary and say, okay, go update the biography of William Shakespeare, because someone found a typo. They're going to go to admin content and look for the author content type, and they won't find it. And you'll have to tell them, oh, no, you're supposed to go over to the taxonomy section of the menu tree. Yeah. So that can be a little disconcerting in some cases. So depending on what else is going on the site, that's a potential cause for confusion. You might want to put everything that the site editors are ever going to be editing in the same place, make it all content types. Some people are considerate to their content editors and provide some sort of custom admin navigation. And if you're one of those people, then that this because you'll do something custom for them anyway. And finally, I've been going since 4:15, so I'm only 35 minutes in. As I said, this is first beta version of the talk. I haven't really prepared enough material, but maybe it's the end of the day. You're just as happy that way. Look in the database. It's easy. Drupal gives us several degrees of separation from our database, but by gum, there is still a database going on underneath our sites, and every so often it's nice to go look there. If you just look at all the tables that start with node in the database, there were 19. I only put as many as would fit on the slide. So there's a node table, and then there's node body, node comment, node field this, node field that. So body, comment, and the various fields, each one of those gets a separate table, and I snipped some of those to get something that would fit on the slide. There's a node access table, so that's yet another difference between content types and vocabularies that I didn't think to mention before. If you want to restrict access to your authors, Some authors are premium content, and you have to pay for it because they're still under copyright. Then maybe you'll want to take advantage of the node access table. And then there's the field data and the field revision and the node revision table, and then there's sort of revision versions of all the other tables. And if you look at the corresponding tables for taxonomy, I think this is the complete list for my little poetry site. So for each field you've added, field biography and field mugshot, there's a separate table. There's the data table, which I think gets the standard things like the weight and the description and the name. Or maybe that's in taxonomy term field data. Taxonomy term data, maybe that's the one that just has term ID, vocabulary ID, UUID. And then there's a whole table for the hierarchy. And there's not only that table, but there's also a lot of code in Drupal in the taxonomy module that supports hierarchies. And looking a little more closely, there are not only what tables are in there, but what indexes are put on those tables. So, right, the taxonomy index was the first table listed there, because index is vocabulary before all, is alphabetically before all the others. And it has a primary index and then a composite index, if I'm reading this correctly. Who's more comfortable with MySQL or SQL indexes than I am? I don't know. And maybe we're all pretenders. So the NID and the TID together form one joint index, and then the other four, the term ID, status, sticky, and created, which I think those are copied over from the node table, so that you can quickly generate a list of nodes that are both tagged with a particular term and are published, and are sticky at top of lists, or you can order them by date. So you have that compound index. So some things you could do you can replicate with views. I said the list of poems that are tagged with a particular person node, but maybe that view would be kind of expensive to run because you don't have the same indexes on your database tables that the taxonomy module gives you. So even though you can create it, it might be performance hit to use content type to do something that taxonomy is designed for. And I think that brings me to the end. So again, that's my name, my email address. I didn't get a Twitter account until someone else had grabbed my name, so I stuck my favorite number in the middle. But I'm Benji Fisher on Drupal.org. In that question? Or you had a question?
Yeah, when you can give permission specifically per content type to roles, but I don't think you can give them per taxonomy type. Actually, it's a question that you can't really. I felt like it was sort of all or nothing on taxonomy types.
Right. So for each content type, you have view. Do you have view for each content type? I think so. View, edit, delete, edit own, delete own. I think you get those 5 permissions for each content type, and then you can assign those permissions to whatever roles you want. And I think you're right that those permissions don't exist on a vocabulary by vocabulary basis, although again, there is a module for that. and I've used it on one Drupal 7 site. I don't know offhand whether it's been ported to Drupal 8. But we could check. Yes, it has a full release for Drupal 8. So if that's something you want, you can get it with a contrib module. Any other questions? Any other differences? Anything you think I should add to the second beta release of my presentation? Is this something you've already dealt with and have some more stories about?
I don't think there's a difference, but filtering views by taxonomy term versus content, I don't think there'd be any difference, but that might be something to look at.
So if you build a view that lists a bunch of things, and then you want to add a filter by a taxonomy term or filter by a node, yeah, I think that would be the same. And of course, I'm comparing a sort of complicated taxonomy where I want to add an image and a long text field to it. In simpler cases, the decision isn't between taxonomy and content type. It's usually between taxonomy and a list of text alternatives. And so some of these things are worth thinking about in that context too. The drag and drop reordering, for example, is often a compelling feature, which is not available on the list of text. Would require a little bit of code, I guess. And there are a lot of advantages to using taxonomy to tag things rather than a standalone text field. Okay, I won't make you sit any longer. We'll push the